Dawn lifted itself slowly over the stone turrets of Ravensshire House, brushing the windows with a pale, forgiving light that revealed nothing and judged everything. Servants hurried across the gravel courtyard with armfuls of flowers, their shoes whispering against the wet earth left by last night's rain. Carriages would soon begin arriving for the engagement gathering, and already the air trembled with the nervous pride of a family eager to impress nobility. Silver clinked, doors sighed open and closed, and voices fluttered through corridors like anxious birds. At the front gate, unnoticed by most, a lone figure stepped down from a modest hired cart. That if you like my content, don't forget to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments. Her gown was brown and plain, the hem travel-worn, the shawl around her shoulders faded from years of weather. She carried no trunk, no maid, no calling card. Only a small cloth satchel hung from her wrist, clutched with quiet deliberation. The gate boy, no older than 14, eyed her with suspicion before opening the latch. "You are not expected here," he said bluntly. She offered him a small, almost grateful smile. "Few of us are, child." Inside the courtyard, two maids halted mid-step to stare. One whispered loudly, another beggar drawn by the promise of rich leftovers. The other giggled, covering her mouth as if kindness might escape by accident. The woman did not object. She lowered her gaze and walked with a slow, measured grace that seemed oddly out of place amid the scurrying urgency. Mrs. Whitcomb, the bride's mother, descended the front steps at that moment like a general inspecting troops. Her silk morning dress rustled with authority, pearls resting against her throat like trophies. She stopped when she noticed the stranger. "And who permitted this?" she demanded sharply. The woman inclined her head. "I was told I might be of service today, madam." Mrs. Whitcomb looked her up and down with open disdain. "Of service? You look scarcely fit to scrub boots. The household is already burdened with incompetence. Very well. You may make yourself useful in the back hall. Stay out of sight of the guests." "Yes, madam." The obedience was so immediate, so devoid of protest, that it unsettled one of the maids. Yet the order stood. The woman was handed a brush and directed toward a pile of muddied shoes by the servant's entrance. As she knelt, her movements were deliberate rather than clumsy. She polished each shoe not with haste but with care, her fingers tracing the leather as though reading a familiar script. A young footman paused to watch her. "You work as if you've done this all your life," he remarked. She glanced up with eyes that held an unreadable depth. "One learns to tend what carries others forward." He laughed uncertainly and walked away. From where she knelt, she could see into the garden through the open archway. There, beneath a trellis of pale roses, stood the bride-to-be. Miss Eleanor Whitcomb was dressed in a soft blue day gown, her golden hair pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet. She spoke with two companions, but her smile seemed rehearsed as though stitched carefully into place. The kneeling woman watched her not with curiosity, but with a quiet, searching attention that bordered on reverence. "She's pretty enough," one maid muttered nearby. "Lucky girl marrying into a dukedom." "Luck," the woman repeated softly, almost to herself, and returned to polishing. As the morning advanced, the household chaos thickened. A tray of crystal glasses slipped from a careless hand and shattered across the stone floor. Before anyone could scold the trembling scullery girl, the plain woman had already risen to help, kneeling again without being asked. She gathered shards with surprising calm, instructing the girl gently on how to avoid cutting her fingers. "Thank you," the girl whispered. "Do not thank me," the woman replied. "Simply remember to breathe." Word of the strange servant began drifting through the corridors. She spoke too carefully, moved too gracefully, observed too closely. Yet she never intruded, never defended herself, never corrected anyone who barked orders in her direction. Near midday, Mrs. Whitcomb returned, flustered by preparations and hungry for someone to blame. "You there?" she snapped. "Why are those boots still visible? Hide yourself, woman. The Duke's family will arrive at any moment. I will not have them thinking we keep vagrants in our halls." The woman bowed her head. "Of course, madam." As she gathered the last of the shoes, a faint sound drifted from the garden, laughter, bright and fragile. She turned again toward Eleanor, who had stepped aside from her companions and now stood alone by the roses, looking uncharacteristically pensive. Their eyes met across the distance. For a brief moment, something passed between them. Not recognition. Not yet. But an unspoken awareness, as though each sensed the other carried a private weight the world could not see. Mrs. Whitcomb noticed the glance and frowned. "Do not stare at her," she hissed. "Know your place." The woman lowered her eyes obediently. But as she turned away, her hand slipped into the cloth satchel at her wrist, fingers brushing against something embroidered within. And for the first time since entering the estate, a shadow of pain crossed her composed expression, quickly hidden beneath the same quiet grace with which she had accepted every insult. Outside, in the distance beyond the gates, the faint rumble of carriage wheels began to echo along the gravel road. The distant rumble of wheels grew louder, threading tension through the corridors like a tightening cord. Servants hurried with renewed urgency, lifting trays, straightening curtains, polishing surfaces already gleaming. The plain woman rose from her place by the servants' door and stepped aside, pressing herself into the shadow of a tall cabinet as two footmen rushed past with armfuls of folded linens. In the courtyard, a groom struggled with a restless carriage horse startled by the commotion. Its hooves struck the cobblestone with sharp, panicked rhythm, foam gathering at its bit. Guests were only moments away from witnessing a spectacle. Without hesitation, the woman moved toward the animal, her shawl brushing the air behind her like a muted banner. "Leave him," she said gently to the groom, who blinked in confusion at being addressed by a servant. She approached the horse slowly, her voice low and even, her palm lifted with quiet authority. The animal's wild eyes softened as she touched its neck, fingers pressing into the precise place where muscle met bone. Within seconds the trembling eased. The groom stared. "How did you?" "One must learn the language of fear," she murmured, stepping back before questions could follow. From the garden path, Eleanor had witnessed the moment. She moved closer, curiosity overcoming the careful reserve she had worn all morning. "You handled him as though he were your own," she said softly. The woman bowed her head. "All creatures respond to kindness, miss. It is rarely offered when most needed." Eleanor studied her face, noticing for the first time the refined line of her posture, the calm intelligence in her eyes. "Have we met before?" "I do not believe so," the woman replied, though her gaze lingered with a depth that suggested otherwise. Before Eleanor could speak again, Mrs. Whitcomb's sharp voice sliced through the air. "Eleanor, do not idle with servants. We have guests to receive." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded obediently, though she glanced back once more as she walked away. Inside, preparations reached a fevered pitch. A young page rushed through the drawing room, pale with distress. "The heirloom brooch for Miss Whitcomb's gown, no one can find it." Mrs. Whitcomb clutched her temples. "That brooch belonged to my grandmother. Search everywhere." The plain woman listened quietly from the doorway. After a moment she stepped forward. "May I ask where it was last seen, madam?" Mrs. Whitcomb turned with irritation. "What would you know of heirlooms?" "Only that small things often hide where we last felt hurried," she said calmly. Against her better judgment, Mrs. Whitcomb gestured toward the dressing room. The woman entered without haste. Her eyes moved thoughtfully across the vanity, the open drawers, the scattered ribbons. Then she knelt and reached beneath the dressing stool, retrieving the brooch where it had slipped unnoticed. A silence followed as she handed it over. Mrs. Whitcomb snatched it, flustered. "Well, at least you are not entirely useless." Eleanor, standing nearby, offered the woman a grateful smile. "Thank you. I was terribly worried." The woman inclined her head. "Worry has a way of blinding us to what rests at our feet." Whispers began to circulate among the staff. She calmed horses, found lost heirlooms, spoke like a lady yet worked like a servant. No one could quite place her, and that uncertainty bred both suspicion and fascination. Later, as trays of refreshments were carried into the garden tent, Eleanor approached her again, this time with deliberate intent. "I never learned your name," she said. "Names are often less useful than actions," the woman replied gently. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Then allow me to thank your actions properly." From within her satchel, the woman withdrew a folded handkerchief and offered it. "For you, miss. A small thing. Perhaps of use today." Eleanor unfolded it. The linen was old but exquisitely embroidered, the stitching intricate and unmistakably aristocratic in design. She traced the crest without recognizing it, only sensing its elegance. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I cannot accept this." "Please," the woman said softly. "Consider it a blessing from someone who wishes you peace." Eleanor tucked it into her sleeve, touched by a warmth she could not explain. Across the garden, a visiting nobleman had arrived early and paused mid-step when his eyes fell upon the plain woman. His expression shifted from polite indifference to startled recognition. He inclined his head instinctively, the faintest bow of respect, before catching himself. She met his gaze briefly and shook her head almost imperceptibly. He straightened at once, confusion flickering across his features as he moved away without a word. Mrs. Whitcomb noticed. Her suspicion deepened into irritation. She marched toward the woman. "You will remain in the back hall from now on. I will not have guests mistaking you for something you are not." "Yes, madam." As she turned to obey, the distant sound of another carriage echoed from beyond the gates, heavier, more deliberate than the rest. Conversations hushed. Servants stiffened. Even Mrs. Whitcomb's voice faltered. Someone whispered, "The Duchess is arriving." Rain began as a polite whisper against the tall windows, threading silver lines down the glass while the household held its breath. The announcement of the Duchess's imminent arrival had unsettled every corridor, yet the plain woman moved through the back passage with the same measured calm she had worn since morning. She carried a folded towel for no reason other than to appear occupied, her steps unhurried, her eyes attentive to sounds others ignored. Eleanor slipped away from the garden tent under the pretense of seeking fresh air. Instead, she followed the quiet pull of curiosity toward the rear corridor where servants seldom lingered during moments of ceremony. She found the woman standing by a narrow window, watching the rain touch the roses. "I hoped I might find you," Eleanor said softly. The woman turned, and for the first time her composure wavered into something warmer. "You should be with your guests, miss." "I wished for a moment without eyes upon me," Eleanor confessed. "Today feels less like a celebration and more like an examination I did not study for." The woman regarded her thoughtfully. "Examinations reveal what study cannot." Eleanor smiled faintly, then hesitated. "May I ask you something personal?" "If you believe I may answer it." "Are you accustomed to service?" Eleanor asked. "You do not behave as one burdened by it." A quiet pause settled between them. "I am accustomed to many things," the woman replied. "Service is only difficult when it is mistaken for worth." Eleanor absorbed this with a seriousness beyond her years. "I worry," she admitted, lowering her voice, "that I will never be enough for the life I am about to enter. Nobility demands perfection, and I possess only good intentions." "Good intentions," the woman said gently, "are rarer in noble halls than you imagine." Thunder murmured far away, and the corridor dimmed as clouds thickened. The intimacy of the space deepened. Eleanor leaned against the wall opposite her, studying the stranger's face with growing fascination. "Do you believe," Eleanor asked, "that dignity can survive humiliation?" The woman's gaze did not falter. "Dignity does not depend on how we are treated. Only on how we respond." Eleanor thought of her mother's sharp voice, the morning's bustle, the weight of expectation pressing like tight laces around her ribs. "If someone shamed you publicly," she ventured, "would you forgive them?" "Forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves first," the woman answered. "But it must be earned if it is to mend anything." They stood in silence, the rain filling the pauses with a gentle rhythm. Eleanor felt an unfamiliar comfort, as though speaking to this woman relieved a loneliness she had not known how to name. "I feel as though you see me," Eleanor said quietly. "I do," the woman replied, and the simplicity of it carried surprising gravity. Footsteps echoed faintly from the distant hall, voices rising with formal excitement. Eleanor glanced toward the sound, then back again. "They say the Duchess is moments away. I confess I fear her more than any guest. What if she finds me lacking?" The woman's expression softened with something dangerously close to sorrow. "The Duchess, I suspect, values the heart more than appearances." "You speak as though you know her." "I know what it is to be misunderstood," she said. Eleanor laughed softly. "Then perhaps you and she would be allies." A sudden gust rattled the window and Eleanor shivered. Without thinking, the woman draped her worn shawl more securely around the girl's shoulders, a gesture so instinctive it startled them both. Eleanor did not resist. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender and rain. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman's hand lingered a fraction longer than propriety required. "You must not fear today," she said. "Simply be who you are when no one is watching." Eleanor nodded, feeling strangely fortified. "I am glad I met you. It feels important, though I cannot explain why." "Some meetings are not meant to be explained," the woman replied. A loud knock echoed through the estate, followed by the unmistakable creak of the great doors opening. Voices rose in formal greeting. The Duke's carriage had arrived. Eleanor's breath caught. "I must go." She stepped away, then paused. "Will I see you again?" The woman offered a small, enigmatic smile. "You will see me very soon." Eleanor hurried down the corridor, her slippers whispering across the stone. The woman remained by the window, watching the rain blur the garden into watercolor shapes. For the first time since her arrival, Her shoulders sagged slightly beneath the weight of memory. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a small object Eleanor had not noticed before, a signet ring attached to a faded ribbon. Her thumb brushed the engraved crest with intimate familiarity. From the front hall came the deep, resonant voice of a man greeting the household with courteous authority. Applause followed. Chairs scraped. Excited murmurs filled the air. The woman closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself as though bracing for a long-awaited storm. Then she tucked the ring away, straightened her shawl, and walked calmly toward the sound of her son's voice.